It is Gimel Tamuz, very significant day, and it is also Pasha Schutis, a very significant Pasha. Gimel Tamuz is a day that is extremely challenging to our intellect. We have to resort to real insight, a much deeper insight than what we can make sense of. You're 28 now. Now you're 28. So let us understand where we're getting this insight from, this strength from. I mentioned many times, and it's important for all of us to understand, that we do not subscribe to the principles of the concept of what's called blind faith. We are not cultists who say, think this, and don't deviate, just think this over and over again until you forget that there is any other thing to think about, and then you'll be set on the path. You won't deviate, you won't lose yourself. There's nothing to be lost. You're right there in the dark, trying to see. This is not what we mean by faith. Faith, in our book, contrary to saying blind faith, there is no greater brightness in a person's mind and heart than faith. When the Rebbe was talking about Mashiach, and the Rebbe was talking about a very challenging thing, the Rebbe was saying, Mashiach is sitting right here with us, and we already have the, I'm sure you have it in the Sikhs, right, that you learn already. We're already sitting with the Yosin, there is she sitting with the Sheikh Habar, and there, right? And the Rebbe did not say, close your eyes and you will see the Yosin, the Sheikh Habar, and the Sheikh. He didn't say that. He said just the opposite. He said, open your eyes and you will see. These are the Rebbe's words. Open your eyes. Clearly, we have to know what it means to open your eyes, and which eyes, and how do we see through these eyes, and so forth. This requires, this is a lot of insight and a lot of understanding. But one principle is clear. Anything that we're talking about, faith, Yiddishkeit, Torah and Hashem and Yidden, we're talking about light, not Hashon, dark and cycles. On the contrary, I mentioned it, I believe in these discussions on sight. I mentioned it in these classes, I'm sure, that somebody who Nachmon al-Islam, when Nachmon al-Islam means God forbid, is sightless, is part of mitzvahs. Sightless, he can't see. He doesn't have sightness. He can ask me, don't worry, I'm blind, Nachmon al-Islam. Someone who is blind, cannot see, he's spotted from mitzvahs.
All mitzvahs?
He's spotted from the mitzvahs, yeah. What? Yes, because he doesn't have a Yetzer Hara. Yeah.
So if you don't see that
So if you don't remember me discussing this, I'll bring it out as clearly and briefly. I mentioned many times, this I for sure remember, that sight is a very special gift that the Rebbe gives. It is the most fine, sensitive, most spiritual of the 5 senses that we have. We have 5 senses. You know what a sense is? A sense is essentially that which connects us to the outside world. Huh? I'm sorry? Smell is very spiritual. Taste is spiritual. But nothing is like sight. Nothing is like sight. Touch, taste, smell, hearing, and sight. All the other senses require a direct contact with the object that you are sensing. In order to feel the table, you have to be in contact with it. In order to smell, the smell has to come into your nostrils. In order to hear,
The smell has weight. It has like a snap effect.
Okay, fine. To hear, the sound has to enter your ear, has to hit, and then there's actually a disturbance in your ear, and that's how you see here. Taste, obviously. Sight is the only one that you actually see the object without ever coming in contact with it, without the need of coming in contact. You're missing nothing, even though you never touch it. On the contrary, many times you're looking at a piece of art and you say, "You're too close. Move back a little bit." You'll have a better idea what you're looking at. And what is the principal difference? So it's explained in Hasidus that sight allows you to see the Mahus Hadom. It's impossible to discuss the entire breadth of it, but essentially it is this principle that everything that you come in contact with, every sense, becomes real because of the fact of its effect on you. And you touch the table, so it affects your hand. And you feel something. So then, because it affects your hand, that's how you know there is a table. The smell, the same thing. Sight, you know this thing not because it affects you, but because the thing itself exists. Nothing to do with you. Which means you know the truth of something. You know that it truly exists. It doesn't exist because of your personal experience. It exists because it exists on its own. So you know the thing so to speak, in its own words, in its own parameters. Which means you know the truth of something. The mahus. You know it the way it knows itself rather than the way you know it. Okay, this is very brief. In order for the Yetzer Hara to attract a person, Yetzer Hara is attracted to something real. Something imaginary, real. Something that is not real, imaginary, it doesn't attract. This is why Suma, because he doesn't see even though he has other senses, because the world isn't real to him, this is why he doesn't have a Yetzer Hara. See, since he doesn't have a Yetzer Hara, he's part of mitzvahs, because mitzvahs are the antidote to the Yetzer Hara. Okay, this is just Bekisadi. What I'm trying to point out is that blind faith is absolutely out of our verbiage. Everything, I've even been talking about faith, and we say clearly this is not something that you can understand with your seichel. You cannot rationalize it. You have to take it with faith. But this faith is something which is within you, which is a property, a real property, that you really recognize and really can relate to and understand from the perspective of above understanding. Now let's go into the Pasha. The Pasha is Pasha's Chukas. The word Chukah means a decree. Chukah, we know that in the Torah there is Eidos, Chukim and Mishpotim. Everybody knows this, right? I don't have to elaborate. It is Chukim and Mishpotim. Chukim are those parts, that section of the Torah mitzvahs that do not lend themselves to not easily understood with seichel. You can't really make sense of them. This is chukim. So now the question is, Hashem gave us mitzvahs, and He gave mitzvahs to us because we have intellect, because we have an ability to understand and rationalize, and act according to our intellect, not to act like an animal, but to act like a human being, with personal decision and judgment, and being bechira, so that we have to be involved intellectually. And then he says, here is a law that I want to do, but this is a chukah, and you cannot understand it. So how does that relate to us? A chukah belongs to the animal world. They can do things without understanding. But we cannot. And you don't want us to do things without understanding. You want us to do things as human beings. Do you want us to do a chukah with our full judgment, with our full bechira? But how? We don't understand it. Okay? This is the question I want to discuss. I think you're blocking somebody. The word chukah, as we said, means a decree. But the root word of chukah, the root word, in other words, the literal meaning of the word, this is there are different usages of the word, but the root word of chukah means something. Chukah chokakti. Chokakti means I engraved. Chukah means an engravement. Engravement? Do you know what engravement is?
Scarved. Scarved. По-русски? Выкороженный. Выкорачивание.
Huh? Hakika, yeah. Okay, so no, everybody knows what that is, right?
Okay, great.
And the word in English is engraved. There are three different means, three different ways that something can be made, a message can be forwarded, can be expressed. Writing, engravement, and in engraving itself there are two types of engraving. What are they? There's an engraving that you engrave on top of the stone, and the engraving that you engrave through and through the stone. In other words, if you want to make an olive, you can engrave it on top of the stone so that the back of the olive is still the same stone. Or you can cut it right through. It's called, that is not actually properly not called engraving, it's called cutting, because you cut right through the stone. Now, when you write, it's called ksiva, when you write, then you have a piece of parchment or a piece of paper, and you write with a pen, on top of the parchment. So actually, how do we see the writing? We see the writing because this writing blocks. What blocks means it covers up a piece of the parchment. So instead of seeing the parchment, you see the ink, and that's how you see it, because it covers it up. That's how writing happens. Engraving is when you cut it right into it. So you see it because there's a change, even though the entire stone, you see the stone is outside and inside. How come you see the writing? You see the writing because this engraving changes the different shades of the stone. It creates a shade. It's not as smooth, so therefore it creates a shade. That's how you see it. And when you cut it right through, then of course you see it right through. It's no longer based on the stone, it's based on, you see the letter itself, and it's part of the stone. To take this into a ruchnisdike arena, ruchnisdike world, a spiritual world. Essentially, what I'm going to explain to you is that there is the intellect, and there are three different levels of the intellect. Now, normally, when we learn something logically, we understand something based on logic. This makes sense. It has to be it has to be understood that even though you present something logically, there is still an element of the human soul in all understanding. Let me explain to you what I mean. Take the simplest level of understanding. 2 times 2 equals to 4, which I mentioned in the past. Now, the computer also, so to speak, knows. Doesn't know, but if he's put 2 times 4, it'll say 2, it'll say it's 4. And the human being knows that 2 times 2 equals to 4. And everybody readily understands that there's a very fundamental difference between the way the computer knows it and the way the human being knows it. The computer knows only the surface. You know what the surface means? Surface? Huh? Go ahead. Surface means the top. That's the way it appears. That's the way it appears. You have 2, and then 2. Count them over, you have 4. Okay, 2 times 2 equals to 4. He doesn't know the significance of this. He doesn't know that this is true. That it has to be like this. It happens to be like this. A human being, even at such a simple, low level of intellect, also, he really relates to it. It really makes sense. He says, yeah, that's the way it has to be. It cannot be any other way. Not something that needs to be forced upon him, proven to him. Yeah, of course, that's the only way it can be. Yeah, but it makes sense. In other words, there is what we call a neshama element behind this understanding. It's not something that's being sort of taught and forced into his mind. This is something that he can readily accept and understand that this is the correct way, this is true. This understanding that this is true is a real neshama element. Because lahavdil, an animal, is also alive. An animal can never understand that 2 times 2 equals to 4. Doesn't have that capacity. Okay. So this is also a neshama element. However, the neshama element in it, the life element, the depth of it, is concealed, is hidden behind the simple logical and intellectual part. It appears as if this is just simply known externally by logical proof. Whereas, but behind that is the real understanding of the neshama. So this is similar to writing on parchment. The parchment, you write on the parchment, and even though, there is a parchment behind it, but it hides some of the clarity and the purity of the parchment, and that's how you see it. And this is the same thing. You see it because some of the purity of the neshama is hidden behind the logic. So you see the neshama through the logic. This is what's called simple intellectual process. Plain seichel. Then there is what we want to call the chukah, engraving. When you're talking about engraving, there you're actually relating to this inyan that you're talking about, not the way it is written from outside on top of the neshama, like we write letters on the parchment, but you're actually accessing. You're touching the way the inyan is in the neshama itself. It's engraved in the neshama. Excuse me? This is like chutz.
They're touching it more than mishpatim?
Yes, because mishpatim, there is the logic that kind of interferes with the brightness of the neshama. Let's say, I'll explain to you. Everybody understands that you must not steal someone else's property. Excuse me? Everybody understands. Now we all know that stealing is inappropriate. It's not proper human behavior. Your neshama, in other words, your human neshama tells you, this is not proper. At the same time, you also say, you know why it's improper? Because if you steal from him, somebody else is going to come steal from you. And then somebody else is going to start to steal from him. And the whole society is going to be destroyed. Not going to be any peace. People are going to start constantly disrupt each other's lives. In order to live within society, in order to have some kind of civility, you have to have certain rules. One of the rules is don't steal. Now you see the difference. This way is not an neshama understanding. This is an external, a seichelic kind of explanation. This is not a neshama even. You understand? So that this seichel covers up on the neshama. The real truth is that you must not steal because you must not steal. Because the neshama says don't steal. Because the Rebbe says don't steal. But there is also an understanding about it. It's logic. And that logic covers the purity, so to speak, of the neshama. You understand? When you're accessing, when you're coming deeper into the neshama, you're bringing out such things which are like a chukah, where the seichel cannot fully comprehend. There you say, this is not something which the seichel can conceal in the neshama. You can readily see that this is a neshama element. It's a neshama element. Let's take an example. Common example of a chukah that Rashi brings down very often. Now, poradum is an example is shatnez. Shatnez is a must not mix linen and wool in the same garment. One thread of wool in a garment of linen makes it possible. You're not allowed to wear it. And vice versa. Okay? That's what the Torah says. Now, what effect is it? Who gets hurt by mixing linen and wool? What is the what's wrong with it? You don't know. It's a hookah. On the other hand, nevertheless, we understand, we can readily relate to what the mitzvah is. Don't mix wool and linen. There are two different categories. One is a plant, and one is a living, coming from a living animal. And the Rebbe says, don't mix them. The Rebbe said, don't mix milk and meat. Again, it's a chuppah, because what's wrong with it? Now, what are the consequences? We don't know the consequences. But still, we see some element. We have some kind of a seichelic approach to understand what is it that is being prohibited. The mixing of things which have different sources and different properties and different natures. So this is comparable. This is the level of chukah, how to say, it is engraved, but there is still an element of seichel in it. We can still relate to it. And this element of seichel, this is how we're able to see it. This is like engraving on top of the stone. So that you don't readily and completely see, this is a neshama thing. This has absolutely nothing to do with seichel, nothing to do with the world. This is totally a neshama inyan. There definitely is a neshama inyan. Because there's no way that you can fully understand it. But nevertheless, there is also a seichelic interference with the purity of it. And that way, this is how you're able to see it. This is comparable to something that you engrave on top of the stone. So you're still looking at this at the stone, but the stone is no longer so pure because it has different shading because of the lettering. Okay. So this is the second type of mitzvahs. Then there's a third inyan, a third chukah. This is what's called poradum, the chukah of poradum. Chukah of poraduma is in a category by itself. Because poraduma is a chukah, but it is a kind of a chukah that the intellect has no access, no approach at all. Not like in shatnez. Oh, I see what I'm doing. I'm mixing wool and linen. Milk and milk. I see what I'm doing. I'm mixing two different types of foods. Something. Here we don't see at all. Anything. There's absolutely no grasp, no touch, no way to relate to it. It's a seichel.
Pure faith.
There's no way to relate to a pure seichel. This is what's called the chukah. This is comparable to an engraving in the stone that you engrave through and through, where there's no external involvement whatsoever. Now, coming back to my original question, how is it that we are required to do things that we do not understand what I'm saying? And how we're going to perform it? What's our resource? What's our means to do that? The answer is that we have a neshama. And the neshama is superior to our logic, to our intellect. There are certain elements of the neshama that come out in the form that the logic and the intellect can relate to. There are certain elements in the neshama that our logic and intellect cannot fully relate to, understand, but it can have some connection to. Certain elements in the neshama that come directly from the essence of the neshama itself. That is clearly neshama element. It has nothing to do with external understanding. Nothing whatsoever. Now, the important point which I want to do, that we should understand, just as we pointed out before, that even the most superficial level of intellect, like don't steal, is also something that touches the neshama. It's also something that we can understand much deeper than the computer. It has a meaning to us, a significance. Where does that come from? That comes from the godly neshama that they're able to give us. This is a spark of godliness. And so to speak, the element of truth that every person possesses. This element of truth exists at a deeper level and yet a deeper level. What is the principle of the element of truth? Where does truth come from? Do not steal, right? And everybody knows that is wrong. And it's wrong not only because it has terrible consequences. It disrupts society, and disrupts peace, and it creates havoc, whatever it is. It's wrong in its very essence. What does that mean? It's wrong in its very essence. In other words, not because of the consequence of it, consequence, but because of its very nature itself. Where does that nature come from? What makes it that this is wrong in its very nature? This very nature, this very essential truth, very essential reality of it, is a reflection of the godly presence in the human being and in the world. Maybe I'll come back to talk about it. Okay. Okay. Let's first understand ourselves. So how we know. Okay. This watch. And you see the watch over here. It makes absolutely no difference in whose hand it is. It will work exactly the same way whether it's in my hand or it's in somebody else's hand. It makes absolutely no difference whether it's yours, rightfully so, you paid for it, or you took it out of somebody's pocket and it serves you well. Makes no difference. That is true only when you look at it only from its, so to speak, from its present existence, from a physical perspective. But when you recognize that the whole principle of existence is, it exists because God created it, and because there's a godly element in the whole world, then it makes enormous difference. Then things, if they are yours, they have to come to you in the right way, in a manner that is in consort, in agreement with the godly principle in the world. That everyone has his place, everyone has his world, that the religion is blessed in it. And if this is supposed to transfer ahead from me to you, it has to transfer hands correctly. Either I give you a matana, or you buy it, or whatever it is. A gift. There has to be a consensual, a proper transfer. And if it is not, then you have violated the godly truth in the world. How can you violate the godly truth in the world? Really, you cannot. And ultimately, everything, the Rebbe will see to it that everything is right. But superficially, You violate it because you look at it only from the perspective that this is a physical entity, and you forget about the fact that really this physical entity belongs to the godly world. So you forget about it and taking it on. But in reality, it exists because this is God's world, and therefore it has to be righted, and it has to happen all in the way that is correct to be in the God's world. This is the principle, that to steal is wrong, in principle. Now you asked about going, so I want to elaborate a little bit. A Yid is conscious that this is God's world. A Goy is conscious that this is a human world. It's two different levels. So there's what's called Seichel and Nushi, a human world. So on a human level, also this is wrong. On the godly level, it is completely different. It's a completely different level of wrong. You understand? But on the human level, it is also wrong. But the point which I'm trying to make is that we recognize, even in this simple level, in this simple view, we recognize that there is something more real than the superficial, than the logical. There's a real truth in the world. And we recognize it with our own souls. This is not something that has to be forced upon us. You ask a person, is it right? Is it okay to steal? He will say, no, it's not okay. Why? I don't know, it's just wrong. He won't say, because if I steal, somebody else is going to steal from me. He'll say, it's just wrong. Which means he's got this insight. Which means he recognizes that the world does not belong to him. I can take it and nobody knows the difference. But that doesn't change the fact that this is not yours. And we all recognize, we all understand, yes, this is not hefker, this is not just, things don't happen just on the physical level. There is a higher and more profound and more meaningful level in which we actually relate to and we understand and we feel for it. Now, I'd like to take you a step further. We understand that just as we understand that even this superficial level, it already gives us the inkling, the sense that we are perceptive, we recognize that there is a godly element in the world. This comes directly from our souls. We are perceptive with a godly element in the world, even on a deeper level, to the extent where we can do things that are not logical at all. If God said, because we recognize that if God said, do this or don't do this, it makes sense to us to do what God said we should do. Not because we understand what He said, but because if God said it, this is something which is part of our souls. We understand, we recognize the godly presence in the world and in our soul. And if God said, do it, of course you have to do it. This is the reality. This is the reality of existence. This is what's called the element of truth. God said so. Of course. That completely supersedes my logic. Because even that which is within my logic is based on the godly presence. So from this I go further and say, hey, the godly presence, this is the real reality. Within that element itself, when you say that's a chukah, that we do it beyond logic, there are two levels. There is a level I mentioned before, like shatnez, where you mix two things together where even though this is a godly command, but nevertheless I have some kind of inkling, some kind of a means of relating to it. I'm mixing two things. And then there is Por Adum. Por Adum is in a category all by itself. Because Pora Aduma is taking the animal, the Pora, burning it down to ashes, making a heap of ashes of it. And that is what the Rebbe said, this is the mitzvah, to take Pora Aduma and let the heifer and burn it to ashes. Really, there is nothing to it at all, that we have no access with our intellect at all to relate to it. What happened? What did he do? There's no point to it. It's even further out than sharpness. Which means that this has absolutely no connection to our superficial view, our superficial intellect. And this is why this is called chukah, in the real sense of the word. This is a different kind of a chukah. This is a chukah that permeates the whole mitzvahs. We have a chukah that is engraved on our neshama, and there is a chukah that is the essence of our neshama, that permeates the whole mitzvahs. Ultimately, the essence of our neshama is that everything that exists is exclusively the godly presence. There's nothing else. This is the real depth of it. And therefore, what is the value and the meaning of everything that exists? It is how God defines it. If God says this red heifer should be burned, then this is what it becomes the reality. Not based on my seichel at all. The reality itself is defined by the godly presence in the world. Not like the other things what we have, the godly presence that explains to us what our seichel says. This is something else completely. This is the reality itself. This is what permits this engraving in our souls. This is what permits us, gives us the ability to do mitzvahs, because this is what Hashem said we should do. This is what's known as Kabbalah soil, and we spoke about the other before many times. Again, Kabbalah soil does not mean you take on a yoke without knowing what you were taking on. Let me elaborate on this a little bit. An animal also is yoked. Now, let's put a yoke on the animal, and that way you can lead the animal to do anything you want. What is the difference between the yoke that's put on an animal and lahavi, the yoke that a human being takes? The difference is that the animal does not relate to the one who puts the yoke on it. It just takes the yoke, it's being tied down, and it follows the reins. Kabbalah Seil by us, by Yidden, means Kabbalah Seil Malchus Shamayim, which means we deeply recognize that there is a Malchus Shamayim, there's a heavenly kingdom. The heavenly kingdom, this is the reality. This is the reality that we recognize in ourselves. And this is what we relate to. This is the reality. This is the truth. Should a human being relate to the truth, or should he ignore the truth? Every being, every individual says, of course, the truth is what you should live. And if I lose sight of the truth, then I lose sight of my own life. Then life doesn't mean anything to me. Yeah.
So why do that people hate truth, and when you tell them the truth, they go all crazy and snappy? Maybe it's a reality.
Want an answer to that? The answer to that is this. Did you hear the question? I'll take a couple of minutes and explain to you. They recognize this to be the truth. But they do not know because they were not educated. They do not know that this truth has a basis. In other words, this is the truth because this is the way I understand it. I see it. But it imposes upon me certain limits. But where do they come from? Why is there such a truth? Understand? Say, oh, this is because of my own imagination. My own imagination, I don't want it. It's too restrictive. If they would understand that this truth is something that we got from the Creator, then they would not reject it at all. They just simply don't realize, don't recognize, because they were not properly exposed in its English to explain, that this truth is really true. It's part of the creation, part of the reality. It's not something that you imagine. This is what they come back and say. Oh, the truth, yeah, but this is wishful thinking. This is not the real thing. This is the way you like to think about it. It's not. This is a godly presence. This is the real reality. The reason that we have a truth in our souls is because God created the soul. So this is something which needs chinuch, and needs to be teaching and all that. But this is the reason. So this is the Porah Duma. This is why Porah Duma, if you look in the Pasha, it says Chukas HaTorah. The word Chukah is mentioned in the Torah many, many times. How come we didn't put air conditioning today? Everybody is so suffering from the heat. It's a Chukah. In every time that it says in the Torah Chukah, it refers to a specific mitzvah, like Chukas HaPesach. Then there's other Chukim. All Chukim have relate to certain specific mitzvahs. It's a Chukah. And here, it doesn't say Chukas HaPorah. It says Chukas HaTorah. The Chukah of the Torah. What is the meaning behind it? Chukas HaTorah. That even though the Porah illustrates and exemplifies the real element of Chukah, that you do not attach it with your seichel at all. Just the biggest justification for doing something is because Hashem said you should do it. That's the only justification I need. Because Hashem's presence is the greatest reality in my mind. So this Chukah is Chukas HaTorah. This is the real thing. And this is why the whole Torah is based on this Chukah. Even though we have Eidos and Chukim and Mishpot, we have different levels, but primarily it's all based on this element. Even when you do Mishpot, even when you say we do, because we understand that Pesachel, most will say like don't steal. So even though we understand that Pesachel, so there's an interesting twist in this, that we understand that Pesachel, but we do it because we understand it, because Hashem said we should do it with understanding. Not because only because we understand, because Hashem wants it that we should understand it. This is why we understand. But it's not based on understanding, it's based still on the Chukah element. Still based on the Chukah, on the command from Neighbors. This is the true principle of Emunah. Emunah is something which is an actual cognizance, recognition in our soul of the godly truth. As I pointed out, if you always come back to this, that even the simple truth, don't steal, also recognize that this is deeper than just a worldly truth. This is on the Neshama thing. And it's all based on the truth, on the godly truth. This is how we're able to do things which we don't relate to, we don't understand at this level. And sometimes we don't relate at all, and sometimes they're totally contradictory within our seichel. And yet this is what the Torah says, and therefore this is how we relate to it. Because the real truth is how the Torah defines it, not how our seichel sees it in the world. And this brings us into Gimel Tamuz. Gimel Tamuz is a very challenging thing. It's saying Gimel Tamuz. Right? Did something happen? Did it not happen? Where is it ever? How come I don't see it? If it is here, why can't I see it? The fact is, there was 15, 16 years ago, there was a Gimel Tamuz. And yet we say, no, whoever said this is Chaim Nitzchim, Chaim Beguf, but Aguf I'm able to see. How do I relate to this totally controversial, totally contradictory concept? I cannot. Anyone who said that he understands it in his seichel is a fool. You can't understand it in his seichel. You can't understand it with any worldly parameters. The only way we can understand something and relate to it is understanding this principle. That the real truth, the real worldly truth, is not based on worldliness, but it's based on godliness. The way the Torah says is the truth, that's the way the truth is. The Torah defines the truth in the world, rather than the world defining its own. There's a story, and many stories, a very simple story. A story of Rabbi Cheskel Landa. They need to be Yehuda. It was a big, big road. A time of Baal Shem Tov, actually, time of Baal Shem Tov. A very great road. His sefer is called Neida Bi Yehuda, and he's known as Neida Bi Yehuda, Cheskel Landa. And there was an instance where a woman came to him, and she did not know where her husband was. She didn't know what happened to her husband. And she asked him whether she's allowed to get married. So he questioned the whole thing. He went through all the witnesses and all the testimonials and everything, Api Torah. And they came to the conclusion, Api Torah, she's allowed to get married. All the testimonials, all the proofs, she's allowed to get married. And he permitted her to get married. Sometime later, her husband appears.
After she got married?
What?
After she got married.
So she came running to him. And she said, see what happened to me. So he leaned on his hand. I don't know what he thought, but he leaned on his hand in deep thought, long while. And then he lifted his head, he said, no, Api Torah, he is dead. Everything fits. Api Torah, he is dead. The next day, he wasn't there. He wasn't alive. So Api Torah, he's dead.
Yeah.
The Torah is what defines what's going on in the world, not the other way around. And it says, from the eyes of Torah, the approach of Torah, how we look at things. And therefore, sometimes we see things that we can't make any sense logically, from so to speak, on a worldly basis. And it doesn't contradict our view of it from a Torah perspective. And as the Rebbe points out, I mentioned, this is all, much of it is based on Sikh, of course I elaborate, but basically that this is Chukas HaTorah. In other words, it's Chukah of Por Adum. It's Chukah of Por Adum, which is beyond all reaches, all way of touching of the Seichel. There's no access with Seichel at all. Even beyond Shatnas, beyond B'Posel B'Chol, or anything else. Achilles Chazer, Rashi mentioned times. Why is Chazer also called? All kinds of different things. What's the difference? The Gemara says, why did the Rebbe say we should shecht an animal in a certain way? What's the difference in shecht an animal? Everything, this is all chukim. But this chukim, each one in a different level, in a different way, has a means of relating to it at the same. Like the Gemara, for instance, by Shechita, the Gemara says, this is a way to keep a human being a little bit humane, a little bit edel, not just go and chop the head off of an animal. Even though the Chachomim today say, no, Shechita is inhumane. This is the most humane way to take the life of an animal. Huh? Sorry? Oh, humane. Human, the proper way. Human, menschlich, whatever it's called. So there are things that we can relate to Seichel. Then there is things which we can't relate to Seichel. We know one thing, that however the Torah defines the truth, that is the real truth. Why? This is not blind faith. This is not because we close our eyes, but because we open our eyes and we know that what is the truth of the world? The truth of the world is the godly presence. And the godly presence, the godly truth is presented to us through the Torah. Therefore, that is the truth. We don't say that this is the way it appears in the world. This is the way we can lay it out and show it to an animal and explain it to a goy. We don't say that. But we say that this is the godly truth. And what's godly truth? This is the real truth. Even do not steal is also a godly truth, not just a human truth, not just a worldly truth. So this is an interesting thing, that in our day, when Gimel Tamuz is posing such a tremendous challenge, such a tremendous test, so to speak, in our emunah, and the deeper the test, the deeper the emunah that it elicits, it brings out. It brings out the deepest element of our emunah, where we see deep down, not the world, but we see the truth, the godly truth. That's the only truth that we recognize. The truth has an neshama seasons. And that's Chukas HaPorah. The Porah Aduma is the model for the real Chukah of Torah. Maybe it should help each one of us, that we should be able to access our deepest emunah, our purest emunah. This is the brightest part of our humanity, of our human soul. And then on top of it, we apply our seichel and midas and everything else. But the first and foremost principle is to have a pure, true emunah. To recognize that what is the real truth of the world is Hashem's presence. That's the whole world. This is the source, the basis of all blessing. This is the basis of all success. This is the basis of all happiness. We should all have blessings, success.
Oh, man.
You have a question? Huh? Sorry.
So we can kill the Arabs.
Where's what?
You know what I'm saying?